Go ahead and take your Bibles and go with me. Let's join together in the book of James. Is there anybody that's here tonight, I'm not trying to embarrass you, that was not here last Wednesday? Anybody? Okay, so we've got several. Welcome to our study. We're glad that you've joined us. I do want us to grow every week. I want every chair taken. If you know somebody that you want to invite with you, please do that. And also, if you can't be here, you see that we're recording these, and so you can go back and get caught up. And that's one of the great things that's really happened with COVID, is a lot of these things are now recorded so that we might benefit not only tonight but beyond. If you weren't with us last week, you missed one single verse in the book of James. We only got to James chapter 1, verse 1. And so you're thinking, well, I didn't miss much. But you did. We talked a lot about historical critical data connected to preparing ourselves to study the book of James. And we learned that James was most likely written by James, the brother of Jesus. This was the man who had seen everything that Jesus did as a young man. He had seen his responses, he had seen his life. And yet, even though he declared that he was out of his mind at one point, that he was mad, right? But ultimately, he comes to be the leader of the church, one of the apostles, and eventually writes this amazing book, all because the resurrection changed his mind in every way as to who Jesus was. And so know that our author is James, the brother of Jesus. He wrote to Jewish Christians. He himself was a Jewish Christian at this time. Early on in the biblical writing of the history of the writing of our New Testament, literally every believer was a former Jew. These were Jewish believers, and so James is writing to his own. He's writing to Jews, and you can see several markers in the book that indicate that. We also learned, interestingly enough, that according to scholarship, this probably is the oldest writing in your entire New Testament. A lot of people tend to believe, well, Matthew was first, and then Mark, and then Luke, and then John. It wasn't written chronologically. It's not a chronological gathering as a canon. But we believe that because of some historical dates that aren't mentioned, that James possibly was the very first of all of the New Testament writings. And then the last thing, I'll end on this. We learned that God's people were scattered during the diaspora, right, because of the Roman persecution. And we just centered on the idea that, scattered has a negative idea, but quite possibly we as believers, we ought to take hold of that as a positive. Because God's people can't cocoon up inside the four walls of the church. No, we have to be scattered into the world, scattered into our neighborhoods, scattered into our county and our community. And so I hope you thought about that this week, that really it's not a bad connotation to say God's people are scattered. We felt that way during COVID in an isolated way, but we really must grab hold of that term because we should be a scattered people. With that said, I want you to go with me to James chapter 1, verse 2. And we're going to go ahead and peek. If you weren't with us last week, we're going to also pair ourselves with Francis Chan by using Right Now Media. Last week we watched his teaching over the first 12 verses, even though we didn't get there. And I just want to come back and give some of you others just a little introduction. If you've never watched Francis Chan, this is just a trailer to the entire study. It's only 2 minutes, but it'll allow you to really get in step with him as well as we move forward together in this study. So let's watch the video.
What God wants to do is not just make you happy, He wants to make you holy. Have you ever thought of that as the goal of your life? When you're pursuing the things of God, when we're truly following the Spirit into action, it makes resisting temptation and bearing up under the difficulties and the trials so much easier. This is about having a deep, deep relationship with God. It's about knowing Him, and it's about, gosh, everything in my life revolves around Him. It's an amazing thought. I got to ask you, do you have that type of faith? Give me the wisdom I need to navigate through this life in a way that honors you.
All right, very good. We kind of picked that up even midstream in the trailer, but I hope that gives you just a little bit of flavor of what Francis Chan will bring to the table. And his ministry was in San Francisco, as you see from the pictures, and he has removed himself from there and really gone into a third world context to try to share the gospel with the least of these, and so we appreciate that. Let's go to the book of James, and let's start off with James chapter 1, beginning in verse 2. We'll study verses 2 through 8 tonight. James writes, let's start off with verse 1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered, there's our word, among the nations. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he or she asks, they must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord, for he is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. I think Philippians met us in our time of need. I think we're going to find that the book of James is going to do the exact same thing. I want to start off with a question tonight. How do people face life's tests? And let's make it personal. How do you face the tests that come your way? Well, I think that there's several options for us as people, right? First, some people react to life's tests with denial. They say things like, this can't be happening to me, right? And we've heard people say that. Maybe those words have even come out of our own mouths. It's kind of the first option. How do we face a test? We just deny that it's really happening. Other people react with escape. And we come across these people all the time. It may be drastic. Maybe they escape into illegal drugs, marijuana, cocaine, whatever it might be. Maybe they escape into promiscuous sex, whatever it is, one-night stands, these type of things. People face life's trials by escaping. A third option. Still others respond to trials with shallow, humanistic optimism. I talked about this several weeks ago on Sunday morning. That people sometimes, they just pretend like everything's okay, and even in the face of cancer or something really serious, they'll say, don't worry, it's all fine. But the truth is, that's kind of an empty, humanistic response. It's not okay just to be empty, in an empty way to be optimistic. A fourth option is they just whine about it, right? Have you known these people? Have you ever known a whiner, right? Have you ever raised a whiner? Nobody has? Okay. These are the people that echo the refrain, and they sing it in every octave. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, right? And I think people in life, we know, maybe we've been guilty of those. Those are four options. But here's the deal that James teaches us, that Christians ought to respond differently, right? We really do have a different choice. And James stressed that Christians can respond differently. We don't have to just eat it or lump it, or just crawl into a hole. We don't have to run away. We don't have to pretend it's not a real problem, but we can face it. And here's what he tells us. We can face a test with joy. We can face life's trials with joy if we know the purpose behind it. If we know there is a purpose behind it, right? Right now, I think most of us are asking, well, what's the purpose of all this? What's the purpose of COVID? What's the purpose of the coronavirus? What's the purpose of the pandemic? And I think those are great questions, but we know that God reminds us in Scripture that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, called according to His purpose. So there is a purpose. There's a purpose for things much deeper and harder and more difficult than this. There's a purpose for everything. I was having a meal with one of our church members this week, recently lost a loved one, and they're asking the question, well, what's the purpose for this? Because I can't understand it, right? And I don't have the answer, but I do know this, there's a purpose. We may not see it this side of heaven, but there is a purpose. So James starts off, let's start off in verse number 2. He starts off with this profound word. We're going to take just single words out of this, and Sarah and I were talking last week about how much we love verse-by-verse Bible study, and that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be crawling through the book of James, okay? This is no sprint. This is an absolute crawl. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials. Your translation may say when, all right? Notice he didn't say if you face trials. He says when. And who's he writing to? Let's remind ourselves, Christians. He is blowing a hole in this whole conceptual idea that's manifests itself in this popular gospel of today, that if you come to Christ, the traffic will part before you and you'll never ever not have to look for a parking space again. It's nonsense. No, he says when you face trials. Testing is going to come to every one of us. Just mark that down. That's where we begin this tonight. Testing is coming to you. And the Greek word for testing or trials is very interesting. It really can mean tempting. All right? If you go fast forward to verse 13 in this same chapter, the same Greek word is used, and guess how it's used? It refers to temptation. So a trial or a test or a temptation, those are synonymous words used by James here in the Greek text. And God tests believers to bring out our best. All right? Let's talk about the word trial. The word trial indicates a test that discovers the nature or the quality of the person being tested. In other words, in a trial or a test, you're going to get squeezed. All right? Here's the way I used to define this with my teenagers years ago when I was in youth ministry. If we squeeze an orange, what's coming out? Orange juice. If we squeeze a pineapple, what's coming out? Pineapple juice. When we squeeze a Christian, what's coming out? Well, that's kind of up to your maturity level, and it's up to your spiritual maturity, right? It's up to how you view trials. That's why we're talking about this. So trials are a test that discover the nature of the person being tested. What you are on the inside is going to come out when you're squeezed. That's what a trial is, and it's what it does. And James' word reminds us that whether we face trials, that's not the main point. It's whether those trials are going to break us. Okay? It's whether they're going to make us or break us. So here's the deal. People are going to lose their wallets, like I do all the time, or they're going to lose their business. Those are different losses, right? They may have blisters on their finger, or they may have aneurysms in their arteries. Those are different things. maturity. Can't happen, right? There's no short circuits, there's no shortcuts. You have to run the race, the whole race. And you have to go through the entire trial, probably, to find yourself in these two amazing words. What words does he use? Perfect. Now my Bible, I think, says mature. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete. That word in the Greek is the word perfect. All right? That doesn't imply that you can become sinless. It's not going to happen. You know that, right? Evidently. It's not going to happen for any of us. But it does indicate that life's trials help every grace reach its right maturity in somebody's life. That's amazing. So we can, through perseverance, reach this mature state. The second word is complete. You know, the word complete indicates anything that has all of its parts present. No part is missing. No part is inadequate, right? Together, both of those words represent what we're hungering for. Do you want to be a well-rounded Christian? Do you want to be a mature, right believer? Okay? Use it in all the positive connotations. It's that ripe fruit that's sweet, right? And so that's what we want to be. A full-grown Christian is somebody who is mature, perfect, and complete. And that happens through trials. So can we consider it pure joy when we face trials? Yeah, I think we're beginning to understand that. So understanding testings better, we might really be able to see, count your many trials, name them one by one, count your many trials, see what the Lord hath done. And now it's a little bit easier. We're going to sing it again. We're not going to. But I want you to be thinking about that this week. Count your many trials, see what the Lord has done. Okay? Let's shift gears. Now we're going to move into verse 5. And now it's time, now you're going to see how all this fits together, it's time for us to talk about wisdom. Because this is the resource we need for testing times. We need to be wise. So let's go to verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously, all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. If any of you lacks wisdom, don't be misled by that. It's not saying some of you have all you need. Okay? I think James is saying this. It should be understood to say, since individuals among you are deficient in wisdom, like you, right? Put yourself in there. I think that's what he's saying. It's then that we should ask God. All right? Ask God continually for insight. Ask God continually for an understanding. Ask God continually for the ability to see beyond my finiteness, to see his infinite understanding of all of this timeline in front of me. And I think there's a great allusion here to Solomon's request. You remember back in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 7? I'm going to turn over here and read this for you. I think James is alluding to this. It's really a great verse. Solomon says this in his beginning days as king. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a wise, discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between what is right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Have you ever felt like that in life? I don't know what to do. And how many of us say that in a time of trial? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. I don't know how to respond. I don't even know how to take another step in my life. I'm frozen. God, I need wisdom. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask, and God will supply it how? Abundantly. Right? It's amazing. Let's go to 5b. Let's kind of read the rest of this verse again. Who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. Generously, right? Does God give with a closed fist, or does he give with an open hand? Open hand. James is telling us a lot about God right here. He gives with an open hand. In Greek, literally, James is calling him, if you read this in the Greek, he's calling him the giving God. I love that. This isn't anything that's strange to God. He's ready to give. The force of the expression, y'all, is so strong, it's difficult to translate it. He's saying that God's not giving so much as an act as it is just a literal habit. It's who he is. He's a giver. He is the giver, right? It's not something strange when his believers ask him for wisdom. He's just doling it out for anybody who asks. How many of us need wisdom in this pandemic? I guarantee I've been begging God for wisdom. I'm begging him today as much as I did yesterday. It's hard to lead in a time like this. I don't know that I've done it that well. Forgive me if I haven't, because I want to do better. But it's hard. We need wisdom. And then here's the great thing. He gives without finding fault. How many of you have ever given to your child and said something along these lines? Well, what'd you do with the last gift I gave you? That's not the way God gives. God's not rebuking. He's not criticizing. He's not complaining. When I gave you wisdom last time, you didn't even pay attention to it. You didn't even go with it, right? He's not saying, what'd you do with the last gift? You wasted everything else. Why should I help you now? That's the way we give. I do. It's not the way God gives. And here's the great thing. He does it again and again and again and again and again. That's good news. Do you need wisdom in your trial? Ask God for wisdom. Let's go to verse 6. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt. Good stuff. One translation says, let him ask in faith. Okay. Faith in what? Faith in the giving God. Yes. Let him ask in faith. Not this ethereal, disconnected, abstract faith, but literally faith in this amazing giving God. Faith in God's character. I'm going to ask in faith that God, you're a good God. You're a giving God. I can't even imagine how you're about to unfold and just dump this dump load of wisdom upon me. God, I know you're going to do it. I know you can do it. And I know you can do it over and over again. I'm putting my faith in the giving God. The Christian has to come to God with a wholehearted confidence that he will heed his request. Right? That he'll heed her request, your request. No doubting. When he asks, he must believe and not doubt. Now, the Greek word for doubting suggests this critical state of mind, right? Constantly hesitating, being indecisive, oscillating between belief and unbelief, up and down, ebbing back and forth, right? This inner civil war between trust and distrust of God. I don't know if that's what it's indicating. I just don't know if I can, and I don't know if you will. Okay? And then he describes that person how? Like a wave of the sea that's driven and tossed by the wind. I got to fish in this fishing trip Saturday morning up at Cedar Creek with Texas Baptist men. It was fantastic. And we caught a lot of white bass. It was fun. But on the way out, as always seems to happen when I'm on a trip, it's a little bit windy, and we were in this boat without a deep V hull, and so every wave that hit the boat was blowing over the top of us. So it was kind of chilly, to be honest, and we got out there, and now we're soaking wet, all three of us in this boat, and now it's blowing over us, and I'm thinking, waves. We don't like waves. And James is telling us that waves aren't a good thing. Because when you have waves, what happens to you? Ever been seasick? Anybody ever been seasick? Brutal. Right? That's what James is describing. A person who has doubt has a seasick faith. A person who prays saying, I don't know if I can, I don't know if you will, those are seasick prayers. Right? And as a result of this kind of seasick praying, James says that person, he gets really pretty harsh with them right here at the end. We're now in verse 8. He literally says that person is double-minded. Right? Verse 7. Now verse 8. That man should not think he'll receive anything. Let's talk about that. What's the result of you praying seasick? with a seasick faith. You know what the result is? You're not getting anything. Cindy, you're going to just run up here and tackle me. You ain't getting nothing. Did you let it pass? It's really one of the great joys of preaching is you have all these teachers in the audience, and every church I've been in has an old retired English teacher who comes and corrects my grammar. I didn't say you. I wasn't referring to you. See, I just got corrected. It didn't go well. And I pride myself on my grammar.
That sea is getting rough.
I'm getting seasick right now, Morris. But if you pray with a seasick faith, you ain't getting nothing. You are not getting anything. Right? You're not getting anything. So now let's go to this description. Double-minded. This is the most interesting word in this entire text tonight. You know what that word means? James created it as best we can tell. Have you ever coined a word? I mean, you just made up a word, and everybody around you, and you're not playing Scrabble, you just make it up. And people say, is that really a word? This is probably the way this was for James. That word double-minded, we find it appearing nowhere else in the Greek language, period, except for right here. Interesting. It literally means two-souled. Two-souled. All right? S-O-U-L-E-D. Having two souls. Right? Doubting, wavering, divided mind, divided heart, right? And what's it kind of give us a picture of? A person is two-souled, or double-minded, unstable in all of his ways. That's the way James writes it. Unstable in all he does. Okay? Reflects the instability of a kingdom where no person rules. It reminds you of the teenage boy who loved her yesterday, but he loves this one today. Right? And that's exactly what James is describing. Vacillating, seasick prayer leads to an indecisive walk, and such a divided person displays instability in their life. And then let's just go right at it. One who can't trust God may not be trustworthy themselves. Okay. What are you going to do with your trials? How are you going to respond to them? Are you going to put your head in the sand and try to be this humanistic optimist? Are we going to escape with some sort of sinful lifestyle? Are we going to just whine about it and say, woe is me? Are we going to deny it and say, this can't be happening, right? Or can we possibly, even though it's hard, say, God, I see it. Help me to launch out in this vessel of faith, to know that this trial and temptation, it has good for me. It matures me, it ripens me, it proves the genuineness of my faith. So would you allow this thing, as much as I hate it, would you allow it to mature me and make me whole and complete, so that ultimately, when you stare into the gold of my life, that you see your own reflection? I think that's what James is after. And in all of it, God, would you give me wisdom, because you are the giving God. And I know that you're ready to dump that on me if I'll just trust you. And I believe that you're going to give it, because I need it desperately in the midst of this trial. This is a great letter. It is so good. It's so good. And I thank you for being here. If you watched online tonight, I know if we had technical difficulties, I'm sorry. But we finished strong, and I'm glad that you came. Let's bow together for the Lord.